Neil Young is an incredibly famous folk singer-songwriter with hit songs such as Heart of Gold and Rockin' in the Free World. Although many certainly know the singer's name and a good deal of his work, they may not realize the troubled life he's had. In addition to many personal health problems, he's also experienced numerous familial tragedies over the course of his long career. But he perseveres at age 75. Join FactsVerse as we take a look inside Neil Young's lifelong health struggles. Neil went through many phases of his career before blossoming into the distinctive solo folk artist he became best known as. He was born in Canada and early on played in a band alongside a young Rick James. Later, Young began to rise to more mainstream prominence alongside fellow musicians David Crosby, Stephen Stills, and Graham Nash. The band recorded as Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young for a few albums before Neil decided to go off on his own. The remaining musicians continued as Crosby, Stills, and Nash. As a solo artist, Neil came onto the scene with a fairly distinctive identity. It was unique both sonically and aesthetically. Compared to many of the more practiced and stylish folk acts of the era, Neil had a raw appeal, both in terms of the way he looked and the way he played. Although he was incredibly talented, there was a stripped-back approach to his method of singing and songwriting that struck a primal chord with his audience. And his lack of fashion sense and untraditional looks made him somewhat of a stylistic forebearer to the grunge movement of the 90s. If Neil's work seemed pained, it was because the singer had experienced many hardships prior to his unlikely rise to fame. These hardships were oddly numerous and dated back to when Neil was just a boy. Many of the hardships involved medical problems, whether his own or relating to a loved one. Other hardships involved failed relationships. Not only did his parents separate when Neil was young, he also went on to have turbulent romances of his own. Despite all this, Neil has persevered and is alive and kicking at 75. Neil's health troubles started in 1951. When he was 5, he was rushed to the hospital by his parents after he had begun struggling to walk. As it turns out, the young man had polio. Although the polio vaccine became widely available later in the decade, it wasn't available at the time young Neil needed it. As was common for many children who contracted polio, it had a strong negative effect on the young boy. He was hospitalized for a lengthy period of time and eventually had to relearn how to walk. But he did survive the disease. By the time he was a performing musician, few could have known the man they were seeing was once paralyzed from polio. Still, the disease's early effects continued to haunt the singer. He underwent surgeries on the lower vertebrae of his spine in later years and sometimes had to wear a back brace. While this early onset of polio might be enough to make one's early childhood seem troubled, this was only the beginning for Neil. Around the same time, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. This meant that, starting at an early age, Neil was forced to take routine insulin injections daily. Although these injections allowed him to continue to live, they also provided some health complications of their own. When insulin is not properly regulated, it can result in low blood sugar. When someone's blood sugar gets too low, they can have seizures and become comatose. This has happened to Neil numerous times throughout his life, but much less frequently in more recent years, likely due to advances in insulin regulation technology. Unlike polio, type 1 diabetes is something Neil has had to live with for his entire life because there's no known cure. Neil also had familiar troubles at home. His parents' relationship began deteriorating when Neil was young, and they were separated by the time he was 12. His father had been an adulterer and left Neil's mother to pursue a relationship with another woman. Neil had a sibling named Bob, and Bob went to live with Neil's father while Neil stayed with their mother. Despite this odd custody arrangement, Neil managed to remain close to his brother throughout the rest of their childhoods. However, familial tragedies continued to follow the man throughout the years. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure you give it a like and subscribe to FactsVerse if you haven't already. And stick around for more about Neil Young's health. Neil's first serious romance began in 1970. He saw a movie called Diary of a Mad Housewife and became fixated on an actress in the movie named Carrie Snodgrass. As legend has it, Neil tracked the actress down to a local stage production and left a note on her dressing room door that said to call Neil Young. She called him, and the two were living together a year later. In 1972, Neil and Carrie had a son. While this should have been a happy occasion, tragedy struck when their son, Zeke, was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Only a few years later, Neil called it quits on the marriage and separated from his wife and son. He continued to financially support them, moving them around the city before offering them a permanent fixture. However, Carrie and Zeke's increasing cost of living as a result of the cerebral palsy became too much for Neil to handle financially. Eventually, Carrie had to take Neil to court, where Neil was demanded to make $10,000 monthly payments to Carrie and Zeke. After separating from Carrie, Neil married a woman named Peggy Morton and had 2 more kids. tragedy struck twice more, as both children were diagnosed with serious medical problems early on in their lives. Their children were Ben and Amber. Ben was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, like his older half-brother. In Ben, this cerebral palsy caused quadriplegia and prevented him from speaking. Amber's problems were not quite as severe as those of her two brothers, but she did develop epilepsy. Neil and Peggy remained married until 2014. In 2005, Neil was granted a new health complication in the form of a brain aneurysm. While performing alongside the Pretenders at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in March of that year, he began feeling strange. He decided to go in for an MRI scan after the performance, and doctors found he had an aneurysm. This required immediate medical attention, but Neil decided to postpone immediate surgery in order to make good on a scheduled recording session he had planned that week in Nashville. He did eventually undergo the surgery, though. Another issue that has plagued him is wildfire, particularly of the California variety. California is a state known for its wildfires, a phenomenon made worse by climate change. And Neil's passion regarding this issue could possibly be an indirect result of the fact that two separate properties belonging to the singer have been devoured by California wildfires. Neil's always been very passionate about fighting climate change and isn't afraid to use his celebrity status to campaign for political motives. Neil has also rubbed many people the wrong way over the course of his musical career, from fellow musicians to politicians. John Lennon and George Harrison of the Beatles famously derided Neil's music as being a dark and negative influence on the youth. He also had issues with Crosby, Stills, and Nash after his departure and was disliked by Lynyrd Skynyrd. In 2016, Donald Trump used Neil Young's Rockin' in the Free World during his presidential campaign, much to Neil's chagrin. After Peggy and Neil divorced in 2014, he eventually began dating again. He started dating Hollywood actress Daryl Hannah in 2018. The two collaborated on a film project later that year, directed by Daryl and starring Neil. The film was called Paradox. After all the singer has been through, it seems like somewhat of a medical paradox that he continues to live and thrive in his old age. Then again, having risen to fame on the backs of songs such as Old Man, Neil has likely always understood aging. Now it's time to hear from you. Comment down below to share your favorite Neil Young project, or if you're interested in any of the new music he continues to make. And be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Facts Verse if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.